It's strange how quickly life can unravel. One moment, you're on top of the world with everything you've ever wanted: love, success, security. Then, in a single breath, it's all gone. If you had told me 5 years ago that I'd be sitting here, telling the story of how my perfect life fell apart because of a woman I thought I knew, I would have laughed in your face. But here we are. Rebecca and I met in what I thought was one of those meant-to-be moments. It was a swanky corporate event, a black tie affair where the air smelled like ambition and overpriced champagne. I was climbing the ladder in finance, hungry for success and already seeing the fruits of my hard work. I wasn't even looking for a relationship. I was too focused on my career. And then I saw her. Rebecca was magnetic, the kind of woman who could walk into a room and turn every head without even trying. She had this aura, confidence, beauty, and a sharp wit that cut through the superficial conversations like a knife. I couldn't take my eyes off her. She wasn't just attractive. She was captivating, like a force of nature you couldn't resist. We started talking, and by the end of the night, I was hooked. It was as if the rest of the room had disappeared, and it was just the two of us. We went out for drinks that same week, and before long, we were inseparable. I loved how driven she was, how she had her own career in marketing and wasn't dependent on anyone. She wasn't just along for the ride. She was building her own empire, and I was more than happy to share mine with her. In a year, we were married. At the time, it felt perfect. We were the couple everyone envied, successful, attractive, living in a beautiful house in the best part of town. Rebecca had everything she ever wanted, and I loved providing it for her. I worked hard, but I always made time for her. Our weekends were filled with expensive dinners, vacations, and parties with friends. Life was good. But looking back now, I see the cracks that were there from the beginning. I just didn't want to acknowledge them. It started small. Little things I brushed off, like how Rebecca's attention seemed to drift away from me whenever we were together. At first, I thought it was just the stress of our busy lives. We were both ambitious, both driven, and sometimes that meant we didn't have as much time for each other. That's normal, right? But then there were the late nights. Rebecca started staying at the office more often. At first, I didn't think much of it. She was passionate about her career, and I respected that. She told me she had meetings that ran late, projects that needed finishing, clients that were demanding. It all made sense. Or at least, I convinced myself that it did. Then there were the phone calls, quick, whispered conversations that she brushed off as work stuff when I asked. I didn't push. I didn't want to be that guy, the jealous, overbearing husband who questioned his wife's every move. We were supposed to trust each other, but trust is fragile, and Rebecca was slowly chipping away at mine. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. I remember it vividly because it was the day my entire world shifted. I had come home early from work, feeling exhausted after back-to-back meetings. All I wanted was to relax, maybe surprise Rebecca with an early dinner together. I thought she'd be home, but when I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something off right away. There was a car parked outside. A sleek, black sports car. Definitely not mine, and not hers either. My first thought was that maybe one of her friends had come over, someone from work. But as I walked up to the house, a strange feeling crept up my spine. Something wasn't right. The blinds were drawn, and the house was unusually quiet. I stepped inside, calling out her name. No answer. Then, from upstairs, I heard it, voices. One of them was Rebecca's, unmistakably hers. But the other voice? A man's voice. Low, laughing. My heart dropped into my stomach, and I felt like the ground beneath me had vanished. I stood there, frozen at the base of the stairs, not wanting to believe what I already knew. I moved quietly, each step up the staircase feeling like a lifetime. My mind raced, trying to come up with any reasonable explanation, any excuse that would make sense. But when I reached the top of the stairs, I heard it even more clearly, the sound of their laughter, the muffled intimacy that hit me like a punch to the gut. I didn't need to open the door to know what was happening on the other side, but I did. There she was, Rebecca, tangled up in our bed with a man I had never seen before. They didn't even notice me at first. I just stood there, numb, watching the woman I had given everything to destroy it all in one careless act. When they finally saw me, Rebecca's eyes went wide with shock. She pulled the sheets up around her, scrambling to find something to say, but it was too late. The damage was done. I didn't say a word. I just turned around and walked out of the room, my chest tight with rage, pain, and disbelief. I didn't know where to go, what to do. My life had just shattered into a million pieces, and all I could do was walk away. The days that followed were a blur of anger and confusion. Rebecca tried to call me, tried to explain, but I didn't want to hear it. I stayed in a hotel, avoiding her calls, trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong. How had I missed the signs? How had I let this happen? When I finally went back to the house, it wasn't because I wanted to. It was because I had to. We needed to talk. To end this, I found her sitting at the kitchen table, looking nervous but composed, like she had rehearsed what she was going to say. I sat across from her, feeling the weight of everything unsaid hanging between us. "Brian," she started, her voice low. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for you to find out that way." I scoffed, shaking my head. "You didn't mean for me to find out? That's what you're sorry for." Her eyes flashed with something, annoyance, maybe, but she quickly masked it with a look of regret. "I didn't want to hurt you, but you did." My voice was cold, detached, as if the person sitting across from me was a stranger. She sighed, looking down at her hands. "Things between us, they haven't been right for a while. I think we both know that." I stared at her, feeling a mix of disbelief and anger bubbling up inside me. "That's your excuse? That things haven't been right?" "It's not an excuse," she snapped, finally looking up at me. "I've been unhappy for a long time, Brian. You've been so focused on work, on your career, that you didn't even notice when things started to fall apart. So this is my fault?" I shot back, my voice rising. "You cheat on me, and now it's my fault?" "I'm not saying it's all your fault," she said, her tone softening. "But you have to understand, I needed more. I needed someone who was there for me, who made me feel." "Don't," I interrupted, holding up a hand. "Don't try to justify this. You made your choice." We sat in silence for what felt like hours, the weight of her betrayal hanging heavy in the air. Finally, I stood up, feeling a sense of finality wash over me. "I want a divorce." Rebecca didn't flinch. She didn't beg, didn't cry, didn't even try to fight it. She just nodded, her expression cold and indifferent. "Fine." And just like that, it was over. Or at least, that's what I thought. I should have known Rebecca wouldn't go quietly. I should have known that the woman I had married, the woman who had manipulated me, lied to me, and betrayed me, had one last trick up her sleeve. The divorce was ugly. I expected that. But I didn't expect Rebecca to come after everything. Not just the house, not just the money, but everything. She wanted to leave me with nothing, and she wasn't going to stop until she got it. At first, I thought I had the upper hand. After all, she was the one who had cheated. The courts would see that, right? But Rebecca was smarter than I gave her credit for. She knew how to play the game, and she played it well. I got a call from my lawyer one afternoon, his voice grim. "Brian, we've got a problem." "What is it?" I asked, feeling the familiar pit of dread forming in my stomach. "Rebecca's lawyer has filed new documents. She's claiming that you've been hiding assets, that you've been financially irresponsible throughout your marriage." I froze, my heart pounding. "That's not true." "I know," he said, "but she's got paperwork to back it up. She's arguing that you made risky investments, lost money, and tried to hide it from her. If the judge believes her, she could walk away with everything." I felt like the ground had dropped out from under me. Rebecca had set me up, twisted the truth, and now she was using my own financial history against me. "But those investments, they were joint decisions," I stammered, trying to wrap my head around how she could pull this off. "She's claiming she didn't know about them, that you kept her in the dark." The anger surged in me like wildfire. She had manipulated everything from the start, and now she was about to take me for everything I had. The court hearings were a nightmare. Rebecca sat there, calm and composed, while her lawyer painted me as the reckless, irresponsible husband who had squandered our money and hidden assets from her. They twisted every financial decision I had ever made, making it look like I had deceived her, that I had been lying to her for years. And the worst part? It was working. The judge seemed sympathetic to her story, nodding along as Rebecca played the victim. She sat there, pretending to be the wronged wife, when in reality, she had been planning this all along. By the end of the trial, I had lost almost everything. The house, the savings, the investments. Rebecca walked away with the life I had built for us, while I was left with nothing. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have predicted, was that I wasn't going to let her win. The days after the final ruling were dark. I had lost everything. I had moved into a small, depressing apartment, and every morning I woke up with the gnawing realization that Rebecca had taken everything I cared about. The life we had shared was gone, and now she was free, living in our house, spending my money, and laughing at how easily she had played me. But in the back of my mind, something else was growing. A plan. A need for revenge. I wasn't going to let Rebecca walk away without consequences. I wasn't done yet. I knew I couldn't rush it. Revenge had to be calculated, precise, and above all, patient. I started by gathering information, slowly, quietly. I wanted to know everything about Rebecca's life after the divorce. Where she went, who she spent time with, what her plans were. She was moving on quickly, that much was clear. She had already started seeing someone new. A lawyer named David, someone from her new social circle. David was everything Rebecca wanted. A successful, well-connected man who could elevate her even further. But he was also Rebecca's new mark. I knew her well enough to see it. Rebecca had always been a predator, though it had taken me far too long to realize it. She wasn't looking for love. She was looking for an opportunity, and David was just her next target. He didn't know it yet, but he was going to be bled dry just like I had been. It made me sick to think about how easily she moved on, how effortlessly she slid into another man's life, using her charm and beauty to cover up the venom underneath. But unlike me, David didn't know what he was dealing with. I had learned the hard way, and now I had the benefit of hindsight. As much as I hated what Rebecca had done to me, there was a part of me that pitted David. He was walking into the same trap I had, completely oblivious to what was waiting for him. I could have let it happen. I could have walked away and let her ruin his life the same way she'd ruined mine. But there was a better way. A way to bring her down once and for all. I started small, reaching out to some contacts I still had in finance, people who owed me favors or still had respect for the work I'd done before Rebecca gutted me. I needed to find out more about David, his business dealings, his wealth, his vulnerabilities. If I was going to take Rebecca down, I needed to understand the whole picture. It didn't take long before I discovered something interesting. David wasn't just some high-powered attorney. He had his fingers in several pies, including a few that were less than legal. Off-the-books investments, shady deals with overseas companies. Nothing that would get him into serious trouble as long as no one was looking too closely. But if someone started poking around, it could all unravel. And Rebecca was right in the middle of it. That's when I realized what her endgame was. She wasn't just interested in David for his wealth or status. She was setting him up the same way she had set me up, only this time, she was playing a more dangerous game. David was already on thin ice with his business dealings, and Rebecca was planning to use that against him. She was embedding herself in his life, worming her way into his finances, and when the time was right, she'd make her move, leaving him to take the fall for whatever illegal mess she'd created. I couldn't let her do it. Not because I cared about David, I didn't. But I knew that this was my chance to finally expose Rebecca for what she was. If I played my cards right, I could bring her entire world crashing down. The first step was to gather evidence. I hired a private investigator, someone who specialized in corporate espionage, to dig into Rebecca's activities. She was smart, but I knew her well enough to know that she wouldn't cover all her tracks. She was too arrogant for that. And I was right. It didn't take long for the investigator to uncover a series of offshore accounts, hidden bank accounts that Rebecca had opened in David's name, but that she controlled entirely. She was siphoning money out of his business, laundering it through fake companies, and stashing it away for herself. It was brilliant, really. By the time David figured out what was happening, she would be long gone, and he'd be left holding the bag. But now, I had the proof. I had everything I needed to take her down. The next step was making sure David knew what kind of woman he was dealing with. But I had to be careful. I couldn't just walk up to him and lay it all out. He wouldn't believe me. He was in love with Rebecca, blindly, foolishly in love, just like I had been. He'd think I was just a bitter ex-husband trying to stir up trouble. No, I had to make him see it for himself. I started by planting seeds of doubt. I sent an anonymous tip to one of David's business partners, someone who was already suspicious of his shady deals. The tip was simple, just enough information about the offshore accounts to get them curious. I knew they'd start digging, and once they did, it wouldn't take long for them to find the trail that led back to Rebecca. I followed up by leaking a few key documents to the press. Nothing major, just enough to get the rumor mill going. Stories started popping up about David's questionable business practices, about how his finances weren't as clean as they seemed. It was all part of the plan. I needed to isolate Rebecca, to make David start questioning her motives. It worked. Within weeks, David's world began to crumble. His business partners were pulling out of deals, afraid of getting caught up in a financial scandal. The press was hounding him for answers, and behind the scenes, investigations into his business were heating up. And through it all, Rebecca stood by his side, pretending to be the loyal partner, while quietly preparing her escape. That's when I made my move. I arranged to meet David one evening, under the guise of a business opportunity. I knew he wouldn't want to talk to me if he knew who I was, so I used a third party to set up the meeting, making it seem like I was just another investor interested in his company. I wanted to see the look on his face when he realized who I was. We met at a quiet restaurant, one of those high-end places where the rich go to pretend their lives are perfect. David showed up looking haggard, clearly stressed by the chaos his life had become. He didn't recognize me at first, but when I introduced myself, I saw the flash of confusion in his eyes. "Brian, right?" he said, his voice uncertain. "That's right," I replied, sitting down across from him. "We have some things to discuss." He looked wary, but he didn't get up. He was too desperate to walk away from any potential deal, even if it felt off. "I know who you are," I said quietly, leaning forward, "and I know what's happening to you." David frowned, his eyes narrowing. "What are you talking about?" "You're being set up," I said bluntly, "by Rebecca." The shock on his face was priceless. He opened his mouth to argue, to defend her, but I cut him off. "I was where you are, David. She did the same thing to me. Took everything I had, ruined my life, and walked away without a scratch. And now she's doing it to you." "That's not true," he snapped, his face flushing with anger. Rebecca is playing you," I said, my voice calm. "She's been siphoning money out of your business for months. I have the proof. And when the investigations into your company finish, they're going to pin everything on you. She'll walk away clean, and you'll be left with nothing." David stared at me, his eyes filled with disbelief. "You're lying." I shook my head, sliding a folder across the table. "I'm not. Take a look. It's all there. The offshore accounts, the fake companies, the money she's been hiding." He hesitated, staring at the folder as if it were a bomb waiting to go off. Slowly, he opened it, his hands shaking. As he flipped through the documents, his face went pale. I could see the realization hitting him, the slow, crushing weight of the truth sinking in. "She's been using me," he whispered, his voice hollow. "She's been using you from the start," I replied. "And she's going to walk away with millions unless you stop her." David was a broken man after that. He didn't show it right away, of course. Men like David never do. But I could see it in his eyes, the way his confidence crumbled as he realized how deeply Rebecca had manipulated him. He wanted revenge as much as I did. But here's the twist. David wasn't the only one she was using. Rebecca was playing both of us, right up until the end. What neither of us had known was that she had been planning her exit for months, setting up a third player in the game. A silent partner, someone even I hadn't expected. It wasn't long after my meeting with David that things took an even darker turn. I had thought I was the one controlling the pieces, that I was finally one step ahead of her. But then the private investigator I had hired reached out with new information. Information that changed everything. Rebecca wasn't just planning to escape with David's money. She was working with someone else, someone dangerous. Late one night, I got a call from my investigator, his voice tight with urgency. "Brian, you're not going to believe this," he said. Rebecca's been moving money into an account tied to a guy named Victor Morales. Does that name ring any bells? My blood ran cold. Victor Morales was no ordinary businessman. He was notorious for his connections to organized crime, laundering money through high-end real estate deals, and quietly running operations that no one dared to talk about publicly. If Rebecca was involved with him, this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about survival. What the hell is she doing with Morales? I asked, my mind racing. Looks like she's been funneling money into his accounts for months, the investigator replied. She's setting him up to take the fall for her next move. But Morales is dangerous, Brian. If he finds out, he's not the kind of guy who'll just let it slide. The realization hit me like a truck. Rebecca wasn't just planning to take David down. She was planning to burn everything to the ground. And now she was playing with fire, involving people who wouldn't hesitate to end her life if they found out what she was doing. Suddenly, my plan to take Rebecca down seemed like child's play compared to what was happening behind the scenes. I had to act fast. If Rebecca was playing Morales, we were all in danger. David, me, even Rebecca herself, though she probably thought she could slip away unscathed. I needed to warn David, but I also needed to make sure Morales found out what Rebecca was doing before she could vanish with his money. I made one final call, not to the authorities, not to David, but to someone who could get a message to Morales, someone who could make sure the man understood exactly who was double-crossing him. The fallout was swift and brutal. Rebecca disappeared within days. It was all over the news, stories of how she had been involved in financial crimes, how she had manipulated powerful men, stolen millions, and vanished without a trace. David's business was in shambles, and Morales? Well, let's just say he wasn't pleased when he found out what Rebecca had been doing behind his back. No one knew where she went. Some said she fled the country, using the last of her stolen money to buy herself a new identity. Others whispered that Morales had caught up with her, that she had paid the ultimate price for crossing him. As for me, I walked away with my life intact. I had played my part in bringing Rebecca down, but in the end, it wasn't me who destroyed her. It was her own greed, her own arrogance, and the dangerous game she played with the wrong people. Sometimes, revenge doesn't come the way you expect. Sometimes, you just need to sit back and watch as the person who wronged you unravels themselves. And Rebecca? She unraveled completely. Now, I live in peace, far from the chaos, far from the wreckage Rebecca left behind. I don't know where she is, or if she's even alive, but I don't need to know, because in the end, I won. Life after Rebecca disappeared felt surreal. For so long, everything in my world had revolved around her. Our relationship, the betrayal, the revenge. It was hard to shake the weight of it all, even after she was gone. But as the weeks passed, the reality of my new life settled in, and for the first time in years, I felt free. But there was still a nagging thought in the back of my mind. Rebecca wasn't the kind of woman who just disappeared without a trace. She had planned her escape meticulously, as she had planned everything else. And despite the rumors of Morales being after her, there was a part of me that doubted she was gone for good. People like her don't simply vanish. They adapt, they survive. Still, I tried not to let that paranoia consume me. I kept tabs on the fallout from the mess she left behind, though. David, who had once been untouchable, was now embroiled in legal battles, his reputation in tatters. He'd lost almost everything: his business, his credibility, and his wealth. He was a shell of the man he'd been when Rebecca had first sunk her claws into him. Part of me pitied him. He was, after all, just another victim. But another part of me, the darker part, took satisfaction in watching him fall apart the same way I had. Then there was Victor Morales. I knew the man was dangerous, but I hadn't expected to hear what I did next. Word started to spread through the grapevine. Whispers about Morales hunting down everyone connected to Rebecca. People were disappearing, or worse. Anyone who had been close to her during her last few months was either running for their lives or paying the price for her betrayal. The man wasn't just ruthless, he was relentless. I figured I'd be safe. After all, I wasn't one of her close allies. I had been her victim, her former husband, not someone she used in her criminal schemes. But when a black car started appearing outside my apartment, parked in the same spot every other day, I started to wonder if that assumption had been a mistake. One night, I was walking back from the grocery store, my hands full of bags, when I saw the car again. This time, it wasn't just parked there. It was running. The windows were tinted too dark to see inside, but the low hum of the engine sent a chill up my spine. I told myself to ignore it. It was probably nothing, but as I walked past, I heard the unmistakable sound of the car door opening. I froze, the weight of the bags suddenly feeling much heavier than they should. "Brian," a voice called out. I turned, half expecting some nightmare scenario where I'd be dragged into the car and made to disappear. But instead, a man stepped out, tall, dressed in a dark suit, and eerily calm. "Who the hell are you?" I asked, trying to sound braver than I felt. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We need to talk. It's about Rebecca." I dropped the grocery bags to the ground, the contents spilling out onto the pavement. My stomach twisted at the mention of her name. "I don't know where she is," I said quickly, cutting him off before he could say anything else. "She's gone. No one knows where." The man nodded slowly, as if he already knew this. "We know, but that's not what I'm here to talk about." He paused, glancing around, and then gestured toward the car. "Why don't we take a ride? It'll be easier to explain." "Yeah, that's not happening," I replied, stepping back instinctively. "Whatever you've got to say, you can say it right here." The man sighed, clearly unimpressed with my defiance. "All right, suit yourself. But what I'm about to tell you might change your perspective." I crossed my arms, waiting, feeling like I was about to be dropped into something I couldn't claw my way out of. "Rebecca's not dead," he said, watching my face for a reaction. Of course, I wasn't surprised. I had suspected for weeks that she'd managed to get away from Morales. But hearing someone confirm it made my heart pound. "Morales thinks she's dead," he continued, lowering his voice. "That's the story that's been floating around. But my people know better. She faked her death, slipped through the cracks, and now she's got new people protecting her." I swallowed hard, trying to piece it all together. "And why are you telling me this?" "I'm done with her." The man stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "Because you might be the only person left who can track her down." For a second, I couldn't speak. The absurdity of the situation washed over me. Rebecca had already ruined my life once. She'd stolen everything, and now, these people, whoever they were, expected me to help them find her? The thought alone made me sick. "You've got the wrong guy," I said, shaking my head. "I have no idea where she is, and I sure as hell wouldn't help you find her if I did." The man's smile faded, his face hardening. "I don't think you understand the situation you're in, Brian. Morales doesn't just let people like Rebecca walk away. And right now, he's looking for anyone connected to her. If you don't help us, you're as good as dead. Morales is thorough. Eventually, he'll come for you." I took a step back, feeling the world tilt beneath me. This wasn't supposed to happen. Rebecca was supposed to be gone, out of my life for good. But now, she was pulling me back in, dragging me into the same dangerous game she had been playing with these criminals. The man didn't wait for my response. He reached into his coat and pulled out a slim envelope, tossing it onto the ground at my feet. "Think about it," he said coldly. "Inside is everything we know about Rebecca's new identity. You help us, you walk away from this clean. You refuse, and well, you won't be walking away from anything." With that, he turned and got back into the car, the door closing with a soft thud. The engine roared to life, and the car sped off, leaving me standing there, my groceries scattered across the sidewalk, my mind racing. I couldn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling, the envelope still lying untouched on the kitchen table. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see was Rebecca's face, smirking, knowing she'd somehow found a way to screw me over one last time. I thought about burning the envelope, about disappearing, running as far from this mess as I could. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't matter. These people were right. As long as Rebecca was out there, I wasn't safe. And Morales, if he really was as dangerous as they said, wouldn't stop until he got his hands on her. Sighing, I sat up and grabbed the envelope, tearing it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, along with a passport photo. The face staring back at me wasn't Rebecca's, not exactly. Her hair was dyed darker, her features subtly altered by what I assumed was plastic surgery. But it was her. I'd know those eyes anywhere. Below the photo was a name, Isabel Martin. A fake name, obviously. But whoever she was pretending to be now, she was still the same Rebecca beneath it all. The sheet of paper had a brief outline of her recent movements, rumors about where she'd been hiding, who she was associating with, and at the bottom, there was a handwritten note, as if someone had scrawled it in a rush. She'll be in Paris next week. Alone. I stared at the note, the weight of it sinking in. Paris. She was going to Paris, and they wanted me to find her. The idea of hunting down Rebecca, of confronting her after everything she had done, twisted something inside me. I wanted her out of my life. But I also knew that this was my last chance, my final shot at ending this nightmare once and for all. I didn't want to help these people. I didn't want to be dragged into their world of crime and vengeance. But Rebecca had made sure I had no other choice. If I didn't do this, if I didn't find her, it wouldn't just be my life on the line. Morales would come after me. Maybe he'd even come after anyone I cared about. And Rebecca? She'd vanish again, just like she always did. Always one step ahead. Always slipping through the cracks. Not this time. I folded the paper and placed it back in the envelope, my mind made up. I didn't know what would happen when I found her. I didn't know if I'd even survive this. But one thing was clear. I was going to finish what she started. The next few days passed in a blur as I prepared for the trip to Paris. I barely slept, my mind racing with every possible outcome of what could happen once I tracked Rebecca down. There were too many variables, too many unknowns. But at the core of it all was the burning need for closure. The need to see her face one last time and make her pay for everything she had done. I booked a flight under a different name, using the last of my savings to cover the cost. If Morales's people were serious, I knew they'd be watching, making sure I held up my end of the deal. But as the plane took off, all I could think about was Rebecca. How she'd always managed to slip away, how she'd always been 2 steps ahead. The flight to Paris was torturous. Every second dragged as my mind played out scenario after scenario. What would it be like to see Rebecca again? After everything she had done, all the lies, manipulation, and betrayal. How could I possibly confront her and walk away unscathed? It wasn't just about anger anymore. It wasn't even about revenge, not entirely. This was survival. Morales's men had made it clear that if I didn't find her, I wouldn't make it out of this alive. And Rebecca, she was the one pulling all the strings, no matter how far she ran. I landed in Paris late at night, stepping out of the airport into the cold, damp air. I had never been to the city before, but it was fitting that the final chapter of this saga would play out here. A place known for romance, now the stage for betrayal and retribution. I hailed a cab, giving the driver the name of a small hotel on the outskirts of the city. I needed to lay low, stay off the radar. No one knew I was here. No one but Morales's men. The next day, I spent hours wandering the streets, trying to get my bearings. Rebecca was in the city. That much was clear from the intel Morales's people had given me. She was hiding under her new identity, Isabel Martin, but I knew her better than anyone. She'd be staying somewhere upscale, someplace where she could blend in with Parisian society, yet disappear at a moment's notice. Her life had become one long escape plan, and this was just the latest chapter. I had no idea where to start, so I retraced the few clues I had. The private investigator had hinted at an upcoming event, a charity gala hosted by one of the wealthy elites who dealt with Morales. Rebecca's name wasn't on the guest list, at least, not her real one, but Isabel Martin was. That was where she'd be. She couldn't resist those high-profile events, even when her life was in ruins. She'd always been addicted to status, to power. I spent the day preparing. I wasn't going to this gala to blend in or to enjoy the champagne. I was going to end this once and for all. I didn't know if Morales's men were watching me, but I couldn't rely on them to handle Rebecca. No, this had to be me. I had been through too much to hand over the final blow to someone else. The night of the gala, I dressed in a suit I'd bought with the last of my cash. The kind of formal attire that would help me slip into the event unnoticed. Parisian nightlife was glamorous, but under the surface, it reeked of danger, much like Rebecca herself. As I approached the venue, a sprawling mansion on the outskirts of the city. I felt the weight of what was about to happen pressing down on me. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. Crystal chandeliers, polished floors, and the scent of expensive perfume mingling with the hum of conversation. I walked through the grand entryway, slipping past the security checkpoints without a hitch. My nerves buzzed, but I forced myself to remain calm. This was no different than the corporate events Rebecca and I used to attend back home, except this time I wasn't here to network. I scanned the room, my heart pounding in my chest. She had to be here. Somewhere. Then I saw her. She was standing near the back of the room, laughing with a group of well-dressed men and women, a glass of champagne in her hand. Her hair was darker now, styled differently, but it was her. The way she held herself, the way she tilted her head as she spoke, it was unmistakable. For a moment, I just stared, frozen in place. The last time I'd seen Rebecca, it had been in the ruins of our marriage, our life together crumbling around us. Now, she looked serene, untouched by the chaos she'd left in her wake. But I knew better. Beneath that calm exterior was the same woman who had destroyed my life. I pushed my way through the crowd, each step feeling like a lifetime. Rebecca's back was to me, but as I got closer, something made her turn. Our eyes met, and for the first time in months, I saw a flicker of something in her gaze, fear. She quickly masked it with a smile, but I could tell she hadn't expected to see me here. "Brian," she said smoothly, her voice carrying the same tone she'd used 1,000 times before, as if nothing had happened. "What a surprise. Is it?" I asked, stepping closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "You had to know this was coming." Her smile faltered for just a moment, but she recovered quickly. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, taking a sip of her champagne. "I'm here as Isabel, remember? You don't know me anymore." "I know exactly who you are," I replied, my voice cold. "And so does Morales." At the mention of his name, her face paled slightly. There it was, the crack in her armor I'd been waiting for. She set her glass down on a nearby table, her expression hardening. "I don't have time for this, Brian. Whatever you think you're doing, you're too late. You always were." I shook my head. "No, Rebecca. Not this time." What happened next was a blur. Rebecca turned to walk away, but I grabbed her wrist, pulling her closer, lowering my voice even more. "Don't walk away from me," I hissed. "This ends tonight." For a moment, her eyes flashed with something wild. Panic, maybe, or anger. I didn't care anymore. I wasn't letting her slip through my fingers again. I didn't care about the people watching us, or the fact that we were in the middle of a crowded room. All I cared about was that this woman had destroyed my life, and now it was time for her to pay. But then she did something I didn't expect. She smiled. Not the fake, calculated smile she used to charm people. No, this was different. Something darker, more sinister. "You don't know what you're getting into, Brian," she whispered, leaning in so close that I could feel her breath on my neck. "You think you've won? You think Morales is going to protect you? You're a fool. He's been playing you this whole time." My grip on her wrist tightened, but I didn't pull away. "What are you talking about?" She chuckled softly, her eyes gleaming. "Morales doesn't care about me. He's after something much bigger. You think you're here for revenge? You're just a pawn in his game." For the first time, doubt crept into my mind. Rebecca was a master manipulator, but her words hit a nerve. Had Morales really been using me? Had I been walking into a trap this whole time? But before I could say anything else, Rebecca slipped her hand free from mine, her smile widening. "Good luck, Brian. You'll need it." She turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd before I could stop her. Panic set in as I watched her go. What the hell was happening? I thought I had control of the situation, but now it felt like everything was slipping away. If Rebecca was right, if Morales had been using me all along, then what was the real plan? Why had they sent me here? I didn't have time to think. I had to move. I pushed through the crowd, searching for her, but she was gone. Vanished, like she always did. The room felt suffocating, the noise too loud, the faces around me blurring together. I couldn't breathe. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw them. Two men, dressed in dark suits, standing near the exit. They weren't part of the gala. They were watching me. Morales's men. Everything clicked into place. Rebecca had been right. Morales had never cared about finding her. He had sent me here as bait, knowing she would surface. Now that they had her location, they didn't need me anymore. I had to get out. Now, I bolted for the nearest exit, my heart pounding in my chest. I pushed past waiters and guests, ignoring the confused stares as I made my way out of the mansion and into the cold night air. I didn't stop running until I reached a side street, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I needed a plan. I couldn't go back to my hotel. Morales's men would be there, waiting for me. I couldn't stay in Paris. They'd hunt me down. I needed to disappear, just like Rebecca had. For the first time, I understood what she had been running from. But unlike her, I didn't have a safety net. I didn't have offshore accounts or fake identities. All I had was the clothes on my back and the knowledge that I had walked into something far bigger than I could handle. I don't know how long I wandered the streets, trying to come up with a way out. Every shadow felt like a threat, every stranger like an enemy. Paris had become a maze of danger, and I was trapped inside. Then, as dawn approached, I made a decision. I couldn't outrun them. Morales's reach was too long. But there was one thing I could do. One thing Rebecca had never counted on. I could turn myself in. I found the nearest police station and walked inside, my hands shaking, my mind racing. I told them everything, about Morales, about Rebecca, about the fraud, the betrayal, the danger. They didn't believe me at first. Why would they? It sounded insane. But I had proof. The documents I had gathered, the names, the connections. It was all there. They took me into protective custody, promising to investigate. I didn't know if it would be enough, but at least I was safe, for now. It took weeks for the authorities to piece together the web of lies Rebecca had spun, but in the end, it all came crashing down. Morales was arrested, his entire operation exposed. The police had used me as bait, just like Morales had, but this time, it worked in my favor. I had given them everything they needed to bring him down. As for Rebecca, she disappeared again, slipping through the cracks like a ghost. But I knew, deep down, that she wouldn't be able to run forever. One day, someone would catch up to her. And when that day came, I hoped she would finally face the consequences of the life she had chosen. And that's how it ended. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment your thoughts below.